Hello, and welcome all to this very special story. Tonight, I'm going to be telling you the tale of Olentzero, the toy-making, children-saving, donkey-owning hero of the Basque country, who every year spreads joy and presents among the children there. So curl up with a hot cup of cocoa or another beverage of choice, and allow us to whisk you away into a wonderful world of paper and magic. An abundance of different creatures live deep in the forest, many of which can't be seen by people at all. Yet, they are all a part of nature, and over centuries countless people have written stories and fables that tell the tales of them. These stories are what keep us company and take care of us from that wonderful corner in the imagination. The story I'm about to tell you is the story of one of those beings. He is but a humble man whose love spreads into the hearts of all who meet him, humans and creatures alike, real and imaginary. And this story starts very simply, just like many others. Once upon a time, too many years ago to count, there lived a very beautiful fairy. Her home could be found very deep into the forest, in the heart of the Basque country. Now, like I said, she was a very beautiful fairy, with hair golden like the sun and eyes that shone like the brightest stars. It was the job of all the fairies to look after the people in the nearby village, and our fairy was no different. She was almost always accompanied by some funny little creatures who helped her with her work. They were very similar to what we know to be goblins, called prakagori, or nicknamed Red Pants. One afternoon, when the sun was low, she travelled through the mountains. She stopped by a fountain to refresh. She was sat by the water brushing her hair when suddenly the Prakagoris jumped to grab her attention. They had noticed that something seemed to be moving around among the ferns. The fairy, however, continued to brush her long curly hair, not noticing anything wrong at all. It wasn't until one of the Prakagoris' shouts caught her attention that she saw all the commotion happening around her.
"It's a human baby,"
said the oldest of the goblins. "What?" replied the fairy.
"A human baby?"
asked another of the goblins.
"What's it doing here? Is it all alone? Why did they leave it here?"
said all the Prakagoris at once. "I don't know," said the fairy, and she slowly made her way through the Prakagoris and over to the child. It's hard to understand how humans can be so heartless sometimes. All the Prakagoris fell silent as they waited for the fairy to say something else. "From now on," said the fairy to the baby, as she gently reached out and placed her dainty hand on the baby's cheek, "I think your name should be Olentzero, for it is a wonderful thing to have found you. And now, with my fairy magic, I bestow upon you the gifts of strength, courage, and love, from now until the day you die." She gently picked up the baby and flew all the way to the edge of the forest. There stood a little old cottage where there lived a man and a woman who had no children of their own. "They will be very, very happy to receive this child," said the fairy, "and they will take good care of him. I'm sure of it." She wrapped the boy tight in a blanket, and she left him there on the doorstep for them. The very next morning, just as the sun was starting to break through the clouds, as the man was heading out of his house to go and milk the cows, he was startled to find a small baby on the porch in front of him. "Love, come quickly," he called out to his wife. "You'll never guess what I found." She came rushing out to be greeted by her husband holding one of the sweetest babies she had ever seen. "I think he's been left for us," said the man, passing the child to his wife. "Oh, how lucky we are," said the woman, as she cradled the child in her arms. Just as the fairy had hoped, the couple were extremely happy to find this child. They immediately made a little cozy bed for the child next to the warm fire and took him in as their own son. And so, Olentzero spent many years growing up in those wonderful mountains that he called home. He became a strong and healthy man who was loved by everyone. His parents were very happy, and Olentzero was not at all concerned about the strange way in which his parents had come to find him. In fact, he never really thought of it at all. Now that he was all grown up, Olentzero worked every day, morning till night, helping his now old father round the farm, feeding the animals and making coal. After many happy years, the old couple who had been Olentzero's loving parents finally died, and Olentzero was left all alone in that cottage at the edge of the forest, tending to his family's farm, feeding the animals, and making coal. There was not a soul around to help him, and the years went by slowly, until his face had wrinkled and his hair had turned completely white. Olentzero began to realize that living on his own had made him quite sad, and that he missed being around people, because he didn't feel like he was helping anyone. So that's what he set out to do, find and help other people who needed his help. As he headed down to the town, he remembered that there was a big old house. There lived a group of children who had no parents. They survived on whatever the people in the town could manage to give them. And he thought about how he could have been just like these children if he hadn't been so lucky. And once he met them, he realized that these children were incredibly lonely, just like he was, and that he could help them and try to make them happy again. Olentzero was very clever, and he was very handy. So he set about making some toys out of wood for all those children. Little toy trains and dolls and animals, and he would take them down to the children the next time that he headed down to the town to sell his coal. When he finally finished creating all the little toys, he collected them all together in a big sack, put the sack on the back of his donkey, and made his way down into town. He felt a happiness inside him that day that he hadn't felt for a long time, and you could see his happiness shining very brightly in his eyes. It took him the entire morning to make his way through the forest and the mountains to get to the town, but that couldn't change how happy he was. He was smiling as if he was in a dream, for he couldn't wait to see how happy he would make the children once he gave them the toys he had made. When he arrived in the town, he headed straight for the children's house and could hardly contain his excitement as he knocked on the door with his bag of presents at the ready. The children were overjoyed when they were given their presents and invited Olentzero to spend the rest of the day with them, playing games and telling them stories his own father would tell him when he was young. Olentzero began to visit the children nearly every day, and it wasn't long before the boys and girls loved Olentzero like a father, and they realized they didn't feel as lonely anymore. Olentzero had become very well known by the townspeople, and whenever he visited, he would quickly be surrounded by children. This continued for many beautiful and happy years, and Olentzero never felt lonely again. But good things cannot last forever. One winter, a terrible storm came over the town and the mountains. It went on for many days and destroyed nearly all of the belongings of everyone it encountered. The cold, strong winds and the roaring thunder left people incredibly scared and upset, especially those little children who lived all alone in that big house. The weather was so bad that it was a few days before Olentzero could make the trip down to the town. He was heading straight for the children's house to make sure they were safe during the storm, when he watched a shining bolt of lightning flash across the sky and strike down directly on the home of the children. Without even thinking, Olentzero ran straight for the house. As he approached, he could see some of the children at one of the windows. He could see the terror on their faces and heard their desperate screams and calls for help. There was not a moment of hesitation in his mind as he ran straight for the house, which was now engulfed in flames. He reached the children fairly quickly, and he wrapped them all in blankets to help shield them from the fire, and then, moving as quickly as he dared, lowered them out of the ground floor window one by one and told them to back away from the house. Once all the children were out, Olentzero took a moment to gather the last of his strength. But as he readied himself to jump out of the window, there was a deafening crack as one of the big old wooden beams fell down from the ceiling and landed directly on top of Olentzero. He fell down to the floor and cried out in pain. The pain was so great that his strong, beautiful, and loving heart stopped beating. By now, all the people in the town had gathered outside the house. Many of them were crying as they saw the house in flames, and the relief they felt when they were greeted by the children Olentzero had saved did not last long. By the time everyone had realized what had happened, it was too late, and there was nothing anybody could do to save poor Olentzero. Some of the townspeople had filled buckets with water, and ever so slowly the flames that had burned so strongly began to die down, until there wasn't a single flame left. Everybody stood in silence. Some of the children were crying. One child, the youngest of them all, looked up at the house and saw a faint glowing coming from the inside. "Look!" they shouted. And everybody did, as the light got brighter and brighter, shining almost as bright as the sun. It was so blinding that nobody could see what was happening. Inside the house stood the fairy that had found Olentzero all those years ago. She had seen him run into the house to save the children, and so she had come to save him. She appeared right next to his face, placed her hand on his cheek, and ever so softly called out his name. "Olentzero, Olentzero, Olentzero, you have been a good man, faithful and kind-hearted. You have spent your life helping others, and now you have given your own life to save those innocent children. Because of this, I do not think you deserve to die. In fact, I want you to live forever. From now on, you will make toys and other presents for children who do not have parents in this town and the next and every town in the Basque country." She looked up and could see the Prakagori had gathered around Olentzero too. "And the Prakagori will be my gift to you," said the fairy. "They will help you with everything you do from now on." And as she lifted her hand away, Olentzero's eyes gently opened. The Prakagori lifted the broken beam off Olentzero. As they did, he lifted his head just in time to catch a glimpse of the fairy as she flew. And that is how it came to pass that in the middle of every winter, at the end of every year, Olentzero goes to all the towns of Basque country, delivering toys and presents to children who don't have parents or grandparents of their own. And now, many, many years after that magical night, the children in all the towns continue to celebrate the coming of Olentzero by singing songs and spreading his message of love, strength, and courage. Of course, there are some people who don't believe that Olentzero exists. But in Basque, there is an old saying that everything that has a name exists, if we believe it does. So maybe this year, as the dead of winter approaches, you too could sing a song, or pass on Olentzero's story of love and bravery. If you do, keep your eyes on the horizon, because you might just see him, approaching on his donkey, with his Prakagori dancing around him, holding a gift made just for you.